to the big top 25 matchup in the SEC West as the LSU Tigers travel to Ole Miss to take on Lane Kiffin and the Rebels. LSU was a 2-point favorite to open. It is now up to 2.5. And how about this? The over-under jumping from 63.5 all the way up to 67.5 as the week goes on. So let's get into it. And to me, this might be the most interesting game on the slate because I don't really know what to make of both of these teams. And bluntly, I actually think that both of them in their own way are a little bit overvalued. Now, from the LSU perspective, we just talked about it because they played Arkansas last week. We did our Arkansas A&M preview. But look, I think LSU is a good team. But what strikes me when I watch them, LSU at its absolute best in their national championship years and the best teams that they've had, they're special across the board. Special on offense, special on defense, special at the wide receiver, secondary, defensive line, linebacker, whatever. And I get this isn't Brian Kelly's fault. I get that he inherited a roster with 39 scholarship players 2 years ago. And so to be clear, if you're an LSU fan, I am not blaming Brian Kelly in any way, shape, or form. I don't see special across the board with LSU. Now on offense, I think they're really good. Jaden Daniels is phenomenal. This offense is rolling. This is the number one offense actually in the SEC right now, averaging over 500 yards per game on offense. Jaden Daniels, as I said, phenomenal. Over 1,000 yards passing, 12 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's been great. And the one place that I do see special, the one place that the previous coaching staff hit on, that wide receiver room is special. Malik Neighbors, 239 yards 2 weeks ago against Mississippi State. But then on the flip side, Brian Thomas, Arkansas last week tries to take away Malik Neighbors. Brian Thomas has 133 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. So I love what LSU is offensively. I still think defensively, though, they're a work in progress. And I think that's where you start to see the lack of bodies that were left over when Brian Kelly took over. I think that's where you're starting to see the effects, right? A few weeks ago, Florida State, listen, I'm not going to hold too much against that Florida State game. It was week 1, whatever. I also think Florida State at full strength, and I don't think Jordan Travis was 100% in that Clemson game. I think Florida State at full strength is the best team in college football. They're the best team that I have seen all phases of the game, offense, defense, special team, size, speed. But then again, last week, 31 points allowed to the Arkansas Razorbacks. Arkansas is good. Arkansas got good quarterback play. But if you are an SEC West contender, if you are an SEC contender, if you are a team that wants to win out and make the playoff, you got to be better on defense. And that's why this game is interesting. Because 1, LSU is flawed. 2, Ole Miss is flawed. But I didn't even mention this. There's so much at stake for both these teams, right? If LSU loses this game, second loss before September, this was a team that some picked to make the college football playoff. Ole Miss, meanwhile, lost at Alabama last week, so this would be their second SEC loss. At least if LSU lost this game, they'd still be in the West picture. Ole Miss would be completely out of it. And so let's get to Ole Miss because, like I said with LSU, I think everybody liked LSU, but now you're starting to see flaws. It's the same with Ole Miss. And listen, I get a lot of stuff wrong, and maybe I'll be wrong come Monday on this game. I'm underwhelmed by this offense. And that sounds crazy. It doesn't sound as crazy as last week, but I told you last week, that Ole Miss Alabama game, I said, take the under in that game. I don't trust this offense because you see the cross the board, cross the season stats. And coming into last week, Ole Miss was number 4 in the country in scoring, number 11 in total offense. But I said, look at how these games are playing out. When they played at Tulane, it was 17-17 going into the fourth quarter, and they put up a bunch of points and it got out of hand. And when they played Georgia Tech at home the week before Alabama, that was a game that was 17-3, and they scored a bunch of points late, ended up with 48 total. And so the numbers were skewed. And so what we saw at Alabama was when they go up against elite defensive personnel, and I do think Alabama's probably the best defense in the SEC. I mean, maybe Georgia's a little bit better. Alabama's elite, though. But look at what Ole Miss did last week. 10 total points. They scored a touchdown on their first possession, and they did not find the end zone. And so when I look at this Ole Miss team, I've never trusted them, even going back to the offseason. I remember talking about this in the preseason. I said, if Lane Kiffin trusted Jackson Dart, why did he go get not 1, but 2 transfer quarterbacks out of the portal? Spencer Sanders from Oklahoma State, and of course, Walker Howard from LSU, ironically enough. And so when I look at this Ole Miss team, I'm not convinced. And it's been interesting this week because I think there's been some narratives that have come out about Ole Miss against 9-win teams. And just out of curiosity, even before I saw that stat, I went and looked it up. Ole Miss last year went 8-5. They're 3-1 this year. But if you look at who they've beaten, it's kind of a who's who of Who's who of What am I talking about? Here's who they beat last year. They beat Central Arkansas, Troy, Tulsa. They beat Kentucky. They beat A&M. They beat Auburn. And they beat Vanderbilt last year. I'm missing one team. I might be missing one team. Let me see if I'm missing one on Ole Miss. Let me double check on that last year. Troy, Central Arkansas, Georgia Tech, Tulsa. So 4 out of conference. And then in conference, Kentucky, Vandy, Auburn, A&M. So to be clear, last year, their 8 wins. 3 came against schools that ultimately fired their coaches, Tulsa, Georgia Tech, and Auburn. The worst A&M team pretty much of this century, and also a Kentucky team that largely disappointed. This year, their 3 wins were against Tulane with a backup quarterback, Mercer, and Georgia Tech. And so I'm just not sold on Ole Miss. I don't believe in them. And I think this is a game that they probably lose. Now, I don't love taking road underdogs, and I don't totally trust LSU, or I don't love taking road favorites, and I don't totally trust LSU. So what I'm going to do here is a little bit different. I'm actually going to take the under in this game. I just think everybody is totally overvaluing this Ole Miss offense. And I think the defense isn't as bad as people think, but I don't think they're just going to march up and down the field, even against an LSU defense that I have questions about. So give me a 31-24 LSU win. But I think the smart play here is the under. I think it goes way under. I think LSU wins, but rather than taking LSU as the road favorite, I'll go ahead and just take the under.